Good morning. Well, it may not be morning when you're viewing this, but this is Matt Hoey, and this is another in our series of sessions where we just talk a little bit about what's going on here in our wonderful community, the town of Guilford. And I want to thank Mike Graziano for videography, his videography services as he is taping this. And together we've done a couple of these, and I look forward to doing more of them. The idea today is just to talk a little bit about what's going on in the community. I've invited a couple of guests in who are subject matter experts, and they can lend some perspective on some of the very specific things that I'd like to highlight today. Today is also, unfortunately for the children in town, the end of summer. It's the first day of school, but the first day of school always brings great hope, great things happening throughout our community, particularly in the schools. I am constantly reminded of the beauty and the charm and of this community, and the greatest evidence of that is just outside my window. As I have the opportunity to look across the green on a daily basis, I'm reminded of the center of activity, the hub. It's really it draws people together. And if we think about it, just since May, the number of significant events that have taken place on that green, starting with the prom gathering. The senior prom is the gathering of the students and their dates and their families, takes place at the end of May. And then we move on to the Memorial Day celebration, which is very well attended. We have the parade and then the memorial service on the green right after the parade. Then we moved into Flag Day. Again, we had a wonderful celebration commemorating and honoring the American flag, hosted by the Lions here in town. We moved on to Guilford High School graduation, which the pageantry of which is absolutely spectacular. It still amazes me that folks who do not have children who are graduating show up just because they want to be part of that community event. And then in July, Park and Rec hosts the town picnic, which features the town band. And who knew we had a town band? They get together a couple of times a year, but they do a terrific job of entertaining us at the town picnic. Then we move on to the craft festival, which is one of the highlights of the summer. Unfortunately, they always seem to get the worst possible weather. Either it is 100 degrees and humid, or there are torrential downpours. This year it happened to be pretty hot, but once again they broke attendance records and continue to be successful. There was something new to the green this year. The police department participated in a national program called the National Night Out, where they engaged with the community. There were a series of games. There was a DJ, and Deputy Chief Hyatt and I were even in a Congo line with a bunch of the kids here in town. But just a great example of how the police department is part of the fabric of our community. Unfortunately, so often, most folks' interaction with the police department is not positive. And this was designed to build that kind of trust with the police department within the community. And then, of course, one of my favorites, my annual favorites, are the summer concerts hosted by the Park and Rec Commission, including one on Saturday night, which featured a tribute band, the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young tribute band. And I'm old enough to remember them when they were hitting the charts with their hits back in the late '60s and early '70s. So, and then we have some things that are coming up. The Taste of Shoreline is scheduled, I believe, in September, and then obviously the Guilford Fair Day Parade. Even though it isn't hosted on the green is rimmed with people as the parade makes its way around the green and then over towards the fairgrounds. And then the other one I wanted to highlight is every 2 years now, and we hope it's going to continue for many years to come. We have the Guilford Performing Arts Festival, which brings in a slew of different types of arts demonstrations and projects. And to talk about that a little bit more, I want to bring in Peter Hawes, who's I believe is chairing the Performing Arts Festival. If not, he probably has most of the work related to it. And I'd like to bring Peter in at this point. We're back, and as promised, we have Peter Hawes with us, and I'm thrilled, Peter. Thanks for joining me. Peter and I have only known each other for a couple of years. I think we actually met one day after a storm, walking dogs,
Yes.
and observing how badly a couple of those trees had damaged some wires. So, and it's been great to get to know you since then.
Likewise.
And I also just want to thank you in advance for the work you're doing. Volunteerism is core to the success of this community, and it's what drives this community. So thank you for your efforts. And I'm going to start out by asking you just to talk a little bit about the Guilford Performing Arts Festival, what it is, how it got originated, and then we can talk a little bit more about what's coming up.
Sure. Well, from what I understand, the idea for the festival began in a garden somewhere and involved Dan Fisher and William Bowden.
Yep.
William, the former conductor of the New Haven Symphony Orchestra, and now chairman of the Guilford Performing Arts Festival. And one of them said to the other, "Hey, why don't we put on a festival?" And I think it took 7 or 8 years for that idea to marinate and sort of begin to get worked out. And in 2017, a board was put together and the first festival was staged.
Wonderful. What kind of acts were in that first?
The first one was primarily sort of local and regional folks.
Okay.
There were a lot of sort of Americana folk, bluegrass bands, pop, rock, some Broadway, cabaret, theater, dance.
Yes. Okay. And the upcoming one is going to be in September, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of things that are going to kick it off. One of which is a dinner on the green. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the festival itself, in a public sense, takes place between September 26 and 29. And there will be something in the order of 72 different performances: music, theater, dance, spoken word, poetry, improvisational music, drumming, interactive events, shows for kids. And on the Thursday night of the festival, we're holding a dinner on the Guilford Green for patrons. It's a paid ticketed event that we're using to raise money to put on 72 plus free events. And it features a band out of New York called the Afro Bop Alliance Latin Jazz Sextet. Terrific Latin jazz band out of the city. Wine, beer, and thank you to you and the Guilford Green Committee and others in town for making that possible for us.
That's right. Are there tickets still available?
There
for
are
that?
tickets still available. I think as of right now it's 11
Okay.
that are left.
All right. Well, that's wildly successful right out of
It
the
is.
first year on this. That's great.
It is.
So there's 11 left out there. Make sure you get there. How would people get access to the tickets?
Well, the website for the festival is www.guilfordperformingartsfest.org, and there's a link on the website right on the homepage to take you to a registration site.
Great. Peter, a minute ago you mentioned something that I think is essential for people to understand. Free.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about that? It's free to every Guilford resident. How does it? How does
It's
that work?
free to anybody. So the concept is largely to make this as diverse and inclusive a festival as possible. So we've gone out and privately fundraised and gotten support from the town and other places to put on 72 events that in a public sense that are all going to be free to whoever wants to come. We also have 8 artists who are going to be teaching in the Guilford High School and middle school system. Again, all for free because we want to make arts education. We want to expose people to a diversity of performance in the easiest and most accessible way possible.
What have you done relative to integrating it with the schools, with the school community?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is I think one of the most exciting things I find about this is that it's one thing to put on a great show and to entertain people. It's another thing to introduce people, especially during their formative years, to genres of arts, cultures, diversity, races, etc., that they don't typically get exposed to. So the school system has been terrific in partnering with us to allow us to contribute 8 artists. We have a Latin jazz band, we have a hip-hop violinist, we've got a gospel singer, 2 people from theater and musical theater who are going to go in and do workshops in the public schools.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is terrific. You mentioned dance, and you and I have had this conversation. The headliner is Palabolas, or one of them.
Yeah, well, yeah. We hesitate to use the word headliner
Headliner,
because one of the conceits of the festival is that there are so many unbelievable artists here, and we want to showcase them. But because we're sort of layering this with sort of local, regional, grassroots performers, and then overlaying it with a couple of names that sort of, create some buzz and bring some new sort of energy into the community. We do have the the modern dance company Palabras, which calls itself a rebellious dance
Yes.
company, coming in, and they're going to do a performance at the Guilford High School Performing Arts Center on Saturday night, the 28th. They're also going to teach 9 classes in the public schools at Guilford High School and do individual workshops with seniors at Evergreen Woods and with some differently abled people with a theater company called Wheel Life Theater.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm excited about this happening, and you and I have talked. I was introduced to Palabras, I hate to tell you, probably 35 years ago, but through my wife, and I'm looking forward to trying to see that. I understand it might be a tough ticket to get, so make sure you take a close look at your website to make sure that you can get those kind of seats.
Right. Again, those are free, but
Right.
because of the limited number of people that the high school seats, we have to.
There'll be a high
do it.
demand for that, I'm assuming.
Right.
So, so is there a schedule of the events available somewhere so folks can know? And what are some of the other venues that it's going to take place at?
So virtually every church in downtown Guilford will have a big top tent on the green that'll be a kind of main stage. Bookstore, community center, some of the restaurants. So I think it's 12 venues in all. And there will be things going on all the time from basically Thursday afternoon until Sunday evening, many of them at the same time. So what our hope is that you'll come out of a coffee shop or a restaurant, stand near the Guilford Green, and you'll hear music coming from here, a drama piece coming from here, a rock band playing on the stage, and you'll just go, wow.
Good.
We had one woman who walked out of one of our events in 2017, and one of our board members heard her say, "I am so glad I live in Guilford." And so if there's anything that sort of motivates us to stay up late and get up early and do something to sort of stay in the saddle on this, it's that kind of sentiment.
Well, I share that sentiment with that woman who said it's great to live in a community like this, and I want to thank you and the full team on the board for doing this kind of work and bringing this kind of cultural experience into our community.
Well, thank you. And we couldn't do it without we have 75 or more volunteers and the participation of the school system, Park and Rec, and you. And thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Thanks.
Welcome back. I'm excited about the Performing Arts Festival. As you can see, so is Peter and their entire group. This is something that I think the community is going to absolutely love once again. At this point, I want to talk about a couple of updates, particularly as it relates to some housing initiatives here in town. As many of you might have heard, we are in the midst of an affordable housing project. Recently, the subcommittee that's responsible for developing alternatives to help us meet the state goals, and there are some very definitive state goals relative to affordable housing. And just as a way of background, the state defines affordable housing as housing for those who are at 50 to 60% of the median household income in a community. And in Guilford, that number is about $99,000, the median income for Guilford residents. So that means we're between the $50,000 and $60,000 threshold to provide some kind of housing that is affordable to that segment of our population. The committee that's been working for a couple of years has gone through feasibility studies, 2 feasibility studies to determine A, the potential locations, and then B, once they narrow down the location, the specific feasibility of utilizing the Woodruff property. And we went out to bid. We had 5 different housing companies, housing development organizations come to the table. It was narrowed down to 2, and the finalist that was brought forth to the Board of Selectmen and approved to go into contract negotiations at a recent Board of Selectmen meeting is New Horizons. That is an organization that currently runs the affordable housing development up off of Long Hill Road. So we are started on contract negotiations there. It is anticipated that the project will yield between 16 and 20 housing units with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom because there is a demonstrated demand and need for those types of apartments, particularly for single parent families here in town. So we're excited about the opportunity to move towards meeting the statewide objectives for communities like Guilford, to have a certain percentage of affordable housing available, and we're doing this in a proactive manner because it is only a matter of time before the state starts to enforce some of those goals. The second program I want to talk a little bit about is the Housing Rehabilitation Program. Guilford was successful in garnering a Community Development Block Grant award, which comes from the Department of Housing, but is administered through the state of Connecticut's Housing Department. And this program is designed to provide those folks who qualify based on income levels with energy and safety improvements to their homes. The funding comes to the town, and we received an award of about $440,000, and the funding is then distributed to qualified applicants in the community on a interest-free basis. They receive the funds. The projects that are undertaken are paid for through these funds. This is administered by a third-party agency that we have contracted with to manage this program, and they bid out all of the contracts. They identify the contractors, and they award the bids, and they are basically the general contractors on it. For the homeowner, the money they receive is interest-free. It is paid back at the time that the property changes hands. So if it is sold or passed down to a family member, if ownership takes place, the loan amount has to be satisfied. Once that loan is satisfied, it goes back into the pool and is available for another family to use for these types of programs. Today we have 13 families that have qualified for the program, and ranging with a variety of needs, from septic repairs to leaky roofs, to lead paint abatement, new windows, heating system upgrades. I recently signed an authorization for one house for nearly about $29,000. The max any single awardee can get is $30,000. So this is someone who needed some significant repairs, who may not have been able to afford it on their own, and this program has made that opportunity available to them. The last one I want to talk about is a housing diversion program. While Guilford doesn't necessarily per se have a homeless population or a homeless problem, the region does, New Haven does. And one of the reasons Guilford doesn't have a homeless population is because when Guilford families become homeless, when Branford families or Madison families, they typically relocate closer to the urban center where the services are located that they can take advantage of. Yes, we don't have people sleeping on the streets or sleeping under underpasses here, but it is not unusual for folks to identify as New Haven residents, but their last known residence prior to that, prior to becoming homeless, was a community like Guilford or Madison or Branford. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. So Guilford has partnered with the United Way, who has developed a nationwide program for housing diversion. And that is to identify and provide resources to folks prior to them becoming homeless. So when they realize that there are challenges, financial challenges around housing, they would be able to get assistance and resources from the United Way's agency to divert them from becoming homeless. So it's designed to prevent folks from becoming homeless. Guilford is the fiduciary agent in the application to another community development block grant program, which will then be administered by the United Way. So we're proud to partner with the United Way on this initiative, and in fact, the United Way is intending to provide additional resources for some of our social service agencies already here in town to augment their staff and to provide the expertise in assisting people to prevent homelessness. So that is one initiative that is emerging. We've just heard that we received the award. We haven't got the award letter, but we did get a call from the Connecticut Department of Housing that our application was accepted. So those are more on the public side. We also have several housing developments taking place in the town of Guilford, and I'm going to bring Brian McGlone in, our economic development director, to talk a little bit about what's going on in economic development. But he'll also talk about some of the opportunities related to some of the private housing developments. Had to put my storyboard together for this show.
Well, I didn't know what you were going to do either.
Welcome back, and as promised, Brian McGlone, our Economic Development Coordinator, and this is unusual. Usually Brian's got the mic because he's so bashful most of the time. He hates to be on stage. But Brian, thanks for joining me today. We just finished talking about the public housing projects. There's the three of them that we're involved in, and my segue was, there are some other private housing developments taking place, but I don't want to. I know you and I talked about talking about some of the other economic development in town. So the stage is yours, Brian.
Well, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to maybe update people. Maybe they're driving around town. They see some of this activity. Right. So I just a couple quick highlights. First out on the West End, and let me start with Guilford Commons. By now, maybe people know Panera Bread has opened.
Absolutely.
That was a long-awaited, heavily demanded business to come to town, and we're glad to see that it did. People commented about how quickly it went up, and that was nice, but and not to take away from it by any means. When that whole development was approved, the restaurant plan was included, the utilities were put in place, the septic was in place,
right.
So all the critical hurdles were already met. I mean, so I don't want to take away and say it was only construction,
right.
But that certainly contributed to the speed
Right.
Of that going up. It was a matter of months. So it formally opened in July. They're doing well. I just want to comment, too, to the public. The Guilford Commons is hosting a parking lot party Saturday, September 14th from 11 to 4 p.m. A lot of the merchants realize that they haven't done enough to promote the commons, the capabilities, what's there, and they just wanted to do something fun for the public. There's going to be a lot of store promotions going on. There's kids' activities. There will be a live band from noon to 4. There is going to be a beer tasting there, and there's a small fee for the beer tasting. But the commons merchants are donating the proceeds from the beer tasting to our local charity, the Sarah Foundation.
Wonderful.
So the merchants were excited about the idea of trying to give back locally. We have so many worthwhile charities, foundations in town, and they chose that one. So I think it's going to be a fun day for the families and promoting the center. So again, Saturday, September 14th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Come on out and see what's there. Still out on the West End, people may realize or have seen the Schoolhouse Manor Apartments right at the corner of Route 1 and Moose Hill Road. Was formerly the farmhouse for that property. There are 10 one-bedroom apartments in that. Good news, bad news, they filled quickly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it just shows
demand.
it shows there's a demand for diverse housing in Guilford, and this certainly met that. And right next to it, which was the former Old Broadway Mason Supply, or going back to Montana Farm for those that have been around a long time, the New Haven Middlesex Real Estate Association recently moved from North Haven to Guilford. There's about 9 employees in there full-time, and then if you look on the back, they built a classroom to host, I believe it's up to like 60 people at a time. And, real estate agents are continually going back, continuing education programs, and they'll be able to host those here in town.
Brian, do you think that they would make that space available for meeting groups if people needed them or not?
That's a good point. That's a good question. I don't know the answer, but good question. And my reaction is that they probably would if they didn't have a conflict. So I'll look into that and find out. That's good. Still out on the West End, Gatehouse West, the beautiful stone building that's out there, built 5 high-end condominiums in the back called the Woods. You have to drive in and go back to the back end, but it backs up to some land trust property, and they're beautiful units. And then on the corner of Westlake and Route 1 is the Muse condominium development. In all honesty, right now they're in a lull period.
Okay.
They're going through some restructuring financing, but they expect to be back out shortly to continue to finish that project. So that's kind of the west end, and if you flip to the east end of town, those that have driven by the U-Haul site see some heavy equipment on site. They're starting to do site work, grading work to go through the renovation. They're working on the main building right now, and landscaping and reshaping the parking lot, and eventually they'll be building a second building on that site. Royal Printing, people have been asking about that, and the former Royal Printing building has been for sale. It's under agreement. It's in final negotiations. It can't go into a lot of detail right now, but it looks like another business will be moving in there, and we'll know more certainly in the early part of the fourth quarter. And the former Emerson Supply, or Supply New England building, another plumbing supply company, Plimpton and Hills, bought that property and will be moving into it. We're going through renovation plans. Even those that have driven by notice that one of the buildings has been repainted already. There's some other structural work they're going to be doing. If you drive by and you see a lot of equipment and dirt and stone out there, actually that site is a staging area for the water company, bringing the water line down from the tower down Boston Street. So that's just a short-term situation, and they'll be doing other site work once that's moved out. Less visible if you go down Soundview Drive, new project underway there on the corner as you go into Soundview, and it's really the last remaining parcel there. That'll be the future home of the Metro Pooch. Metro Pooch is a doggy daycare and overnight boarding facility. We have a lot of dog lovers in this town, and I know the Metro Pooch is currently up on Route 80 in North Branford, so another business moving to Guilford, but providing a service that's needed by many right here in our community.
Right, and we don't have one, a pet boarding facility in town, do we?
Not a big one. There might be some private homes that do it, but yeah, we don't have a real facility.
Right.
And if you cross the other side of 95 and go up 350 Goose Lane, the former Wilbur and King site, you know, the original Post and Beam building was renovated, and the Stone Agency is occupying that. A 16,000 square foot building was built to the right of that, and that's fully occupied with the Horton Group, American Cruise Lines, One & Company. There's a doctor's office, some other services. So that building is full, and there's a third office under construction right now on the back part of the property. It's 24,000 square feet, 3-story, 8,000. And that is fully leased. Fully leased. So we're
prior to the breaking ground.
Well, not quite. They broke ground,
okay.
but it's pretty close.
Not far past it, right?
Not far.
Right.
So the one other I wanted to just to start to mention to the public, the St. George's parking lot.
Wonderful. I'm glad you commented on that.
We're coming into the town center. And this has been a project we've been working on for quite a while. There's a lot of details and a lot of moving parts that we've been managing. St. George has really been very, very cooperative. But in short, we wanted to try to increase parking for the merchants' employees back in all of those shops that are the Whitfield Water Street shops, freeing space for what I call the real customers. People paying to shop, dine, go to services. You know, we wanted to just try to expand that. I mean, so the good news is it kind of shows the vibrancy in the booming downtown area, and we need additional parking. So we've approached St. George's. They've been really cooperative, but there's issues that we have to resolve. But we're in the final stretches, so we had hoped to do this earlier for the season. We weren't able to get it all accomplished, but it's going to be put in place and then be able to be used going forward.
That's terrific. It's a great opportunity, a great partnership with Father Stephen and the Catholic Church.
Yeah, couldn't say more. They've really been working with us.
Great.
So those are kind of some quick highlights. I did want to comment. I understand Peter Haas was in here earlier.
Yes, he was.
I'm pleased to be part of the liaison from the town with the performing arts. I think it's great for our town. It's great for our businesses. This year, with all the activities centered on the green, we're hoping that will encourage people to visit again, shops, restaurants, and everything, and not just downtown, but along Route 1 as well.
Wow.
Any of our, bringing in people to town is one of the goals of this, and then to kind of show off and showcase our local talents, local talents. Yeah.
Excited. Peter gave us a pretty good rundown on it, and I think the only problem I'm going to have is not being able to go to as many things as I want to, because some of them are going to conflict.
That's true. That'll be a tough challenge.
But over 70 different performances. No way we're going to make them all.
13 venues, 74 days.
Unbelievable.
And hopefully. People may have seen this in the last Guilford Events magazine. We did want to feature the Guilford Performing Arts in the last magazine. And then, too, I guess I just want to remind people, this is a document prepared by the town departments. And, of course, Matt speaks in it each quarter as well. And I do, too. So if you're looking for regular economic development updates, there's always an article in here. You're more than happy to call me as well. I'd be happy to talk to anybody. But this does come out quarterly, and our fourth quarter magazine will be out in the early part of October.
Wonderful. So, Brian, thank you very much for joining me today.
Okay, Matt, thank you.
We're back, and thanks to Brian. Brian does a great job of recapping what's going on here in the community, and there is a lot going on based on what he says. I've talked to a couple of commercial real estate developers who have indicated to me that Guilford is a hot property, is a place where they are looking to do some development, and we certainly will welcome their efforts to help develop this community. I want to take the opportunity to talk about a couple of committees that have been constituted, or in some cases, most of these are relatively new. But the first one is the Sustainable Guilford Task Force. This is a statewide initiative called Sustainable CT, which is designed to have communities demonstrate an understanding of the importance of sustainability going forward in a variety of different disciplines or pillars, if you will. The effort includes identifying planning, identifying activities, and then deliverables in terms of sustainability for our community. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about some of the pillars, or some of the areas that they work in. The first of which is called Thriving Local Economies. We don't have brownfield sites, but redevelopment of brownfield sites, inventorying and promoting local retail, promoting a sustainable workforce, and then also providing resources to support businesses. And you just heard from Brian McGlone, and that's a resource that we're providing to them. Another category that they look for accomplishments or focus on is well-stewarded land and natural resources. And this community has done a great job over the years relative to preserving open space and natural resources. And some of those things include providing watershed education, develop an open space plan. We have it. Check. Develop a natural resource and wildlife inventory. Check. We have that. Manage woodlands and forests. We've got that. And facilitate invasive species education and management. We're working on that. And then there are also a couple other things. Provide education on water conservation. So the program is designed to make sure that you are doing, you have activities and you are hitting benchmarks in each of these kinds of categories. And you earn points for doing so, and then your point total gets totaled up and rated, and if you make a certain threshold, we're going to get the certification, and that's the plan, is to get to sustainable certification. I'll talk about a couple of the other categories. Vibrant and creative cultural ecosystems, supporting arts and creative culture. I think you've just heard some evidence of how we're working closely with nonprofit organizations to do exactly that, and provide an arts and culture program for youth. Well, you heard the Guilford Performing Arts Festival is actually doing those kind of things. This is one that's probably one of the cornerstones of this program, and that's dynamic and resilient planning. It's to integrate sustainability into our plan of conservation and development and zoning. Check. Adapt the permitting process to promote sustainable development, and we have done that recently through the planning and zoning in our land use offices. Couple other things. Assess climate vulnerability. Several years ago, we had already done something. We did the coastal resilience work plan, which identified the threats to our community, threats in several areas to our community members in terms of their ability to get out of their homes or away from their homes during severe severe storms like hurricanes, which we're just about going into that season now, right? But not only that, but there is an economic impact to the community. Over time, if some of these neighborhoods are inaccessible, it's going to create some challenges for us to maintain the value of those properties. These are some of the areas that this task force is focusing on. And then one of the pillars, and you heard it earlier, is healthy, efficient, and diverse housing, which is why we continue to work along those ways. So that task force is a 7-member task force, and they are about to submit their application to the certification body, the Sustainable CT body. It goes in on this Friday, and I don't want to jinx them, but they think that they are in good shape to get bronze level certification. There's bronze and silver. We don't think we're at the silver level yet, but we think that there's a good opportunity they're going to get the bronze level certification. So many thanks to that task force. The second one I want to talk about is the Guilford Safe Streets Mobility Task Force. This was a little long in the making, and unfortunately, it didn't come together as quickly as I had originally planned. But fortunately, we were able to identify someone to step up as a chair. Sam Garrett's has taken on that mantle, and that task force is designed with looking at transportation, pedestrian safety, and coming up with a series of recommendations on what we need to do to ensure walkability and pedestrian safety throughout the community. It's Safe Streets program. People have heard it talked about in different ways, but the idea here is to bring together some resources within the community, work with the community to identify where the points are that folks think we need to improve, what are the things we need to do, work with the police department, work with the town agencies, the planning department and engineering department to identify what kind of enhancements can be done. One of the things that immediately comes to mind is sidewalks, and we have also had a focus on extending sidewalks to basically connect centers of culture with neighborhoods, if you think about it. Giving people the opportunity to walk to places where they're going to congregate or shop or dine or go to school. So we funded this task force with $350,000 so that they could come up with some demonstration projects, get some quick wins, if you will, and or use some of those funds to for facilitators or consultants. So I'm pleased to say that group is well on their way. It's a big task force. There are 13 members, so I don't envy Sam's charge with pulling them together. But the preliminary indications are that this is a great group, and they are in the process of defining short, intermediate, and long-term goals for mobility in this community. There's a little-known commission called the Waste Transfer Advisory Committee. As most folks know, we partner with Madison for our waste transfer station, and the waste transfer station has not had a lot of attention over the years. We haven't reinvested in that for some time. In fact, the agreement with Madison calls for a task force, an advisory committee, comprised of 3 members from Guilford and 3 members from Madison, and their role is to advise the respective boards of selectmen on operational improvements, rate setting, etc. That committee has been largely dormant since the early 2000s. And of late, working with our folks up at the Waste Transfer Station, Ralph and then Janice, our town engineer, we've identified some immediate capital needs, and we included some money in the budget, the 2020 budget, the budget we're currently in, for some of those capital improvements, which will be shared with Madison or matched by Madison. However, we sort of got ahead of ourselves because that committee wasn't in place, but that committee will hopefully be constituted. I understand Madison is going to be nominating 3 members to that committee in September, and the hope is that they're going to start to convene and come up with a set of recommendations for the long-term, the short and long-term viability, and what kind of investments are going to be needed up at that facility. I don't think it's a secret. If you drive through that facility, it's obviously in need of some attention and some repair. At the very least, we need some new pavement up there, some blacktop up there. And also, there are some concerns about the impact of some of our equipment. The scale up there is an expensive piece of equipment, and we need to ensure that that area is secure, and we're not damaging that scale because of inadequate ground conditions up there. So one of the other things that I shouldn't call it task force, that committee will be looking at is the potential opportunity for regionalization beyond Madison and Guilford. I've had discussions with First Selectman Cosgrove in Brantford, as well as First Selectman Banish in Madison, about utilizing Brantford's waste transfer station. I know, for the sake of folks getting in an uproar about the fact that they might have to drive to Brantford to take advantage of a waste transfer station, it's something that we need to explore. Regionalism is coming. Brantford has the capacity, and if we have to make some significant capital investments to bring our current facility up to spec or reasonability, I think it behooves us to take a look at the opportunity to partner with our neighbors to the west in Brantford. One other committee or subcommittee, it's really a subcommittee of the Board of Finance that I wanted to talk about, Board of Selectmen that I wanted to talk about. It had members of the Board of Finance as well. We put together a subcommittee to study the building fees associated with our permitting here in town. It had become apparent, and actually I was alerted to this by a couple of contractors who indicated that Guilford was missing the boat, that we had an archaic permitting structure where we had a permit for this, a permit for this, a permit for this, et cetera, and it was confusing, but also our rates were substantially below what our neighboring communities and most communities in the state of Connecticut utilize. The ones that most communities are utilizing today is a value-based system. So the permit is a percentage of the value of the work that is going to be conducted. It streamlines and simplifies the application process, and it will also put us on par with our neighboring communities in terms of the rates and those fees. So we are the Board of Selectmen recently approved that fee structure. We anticipate it will be going into effect on October 1st. So there's a sort of a grandfather period there. All right, I'd like to move on to what's going on with Public Works. The Public Works Department has had a very busy summer. This was one of the wettest seasons on record, which created some significant challenges with the moving water and the effects of some of those significant storms. There were a significant number of washouts and repairs to roads and our roadside gutters that occurred as a result of that. We haven't caught up fully with all of those repairs, but we've identified them and we're working to knock them off one at a time. Also, some of those storms created a significant number of downed trees, particularly with some of the dead trees. The ash borer is creating some problems. So Public Works was out doing some cleanup, a significant amount of cleanup this spring and summer related to those storms. There's another aspect. The state had implemented a program called MS4, and that's for stormwater runoff management. And the town has stepped up activities in terms of managing the groundwater program. But Public Works is one of those areas where we're impacted by that. The cleaning of the catch basins and ensuring that our water runoff systems are working as appropriate. So there's been a increased focus and demand of time on the engineering and Public Works Department in order to stay in compliance with the state's MS4 requirements. We also this summer completed, I think it was over 11 miles of chip sealing. And additionally, last winter, Falcon Road down in Sachem's Head was damaged to the point where it was impassable. And the Public Works Department, over the course of the late spring and summer, they missed opening it back up on July 4th weekend by just a couple of days, but there was a significant amount of reconstruction done and a seawall and road reconstruction done by our Public Works Department. Just a great job going through that process and reconnecting those two neighborhoods. We'll be looking at some long-term solutions there because that is a vulnerable area here in town, and Janice Blasiak, our town engineer, is preparing an RFQ for qualifications for engineering firms to develop some alternatives for sustainability of that road passageway. So more to come on that piece. One other item I want to give you an update on is the energy performance contract. About 18 months ago, we entered into a comprehensive energy performance contract. We were upgrading a host of systems and equipment here throughout the town. This is a program that was approved by both the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen to create energy efficiencies and savings over the life of the 20-year arrangement. We are substantially complete with that project. We're just about done with the replacement of the street lights to more high-efficiency fixtures and bulbs. The schools, the Board of Education has a couple of projects that are not yet completed, and we're working through a punch list. But that program has already shown energy savings. During the last budget cycle, there were many of the town departments whose facilities had been impacted by the upgrades and the equipment changes were showing a reduction in their energy costs, and we expect that to continue going forward. So at this point, I'd like to take a little break, and we're going to bring Mary Jane Malvasi in, our finance director, who's going to talk about our recent bond issuance and how the rating agencies are viewing Guilford. We're back, and I'm glad to have Mary Jane with us, our finance director.
Hello.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about our recent bond sale and also our interactions with the rating agency. So you want to talk a little bit about the process itself first?
Sure, it's quite a lengthy process. It involves almost every department in Town Hall. We have to put together many schedules of data, everything from how many building permits we issue to the population in the town and virtually everything in between. So we put all this together in what's called our official statement.
Right.
So when the people who are looking to buy our bonds, they read through this official statement, they get a real feel for what's going on in Guilford and our ability to pay back the bonds once we get them.
Right.
So we go through that whole process, and we need to meet with the rating agencies.
Right.
Our financial advisors help us determine who to speak to, obviously, to get the best bang for Guilford's buck.
Right.
We did speak to two rating agencies this year, S&P and Fitch.
Right.
They went very well. I think we were very well prepared, and we didn't have a lot of surprises
No, I agree.
to share with them. And for that reason and the stability of our financials, we our ratings stayed the same.
Same, right.
We're about as high as we can be
Right.
at this point, and not only for the bonds that we give out, but also for the short-term
Certain
bonds.
notes, right.
Mm-hmm.
And our rating was AAA, I think, for
Yes.
both of those agencies,
Yes,
right?
they were.
Which puts
Mhm.
us in the top 10% of municipalities nationwide.
Absolutely. Like I said,
Right.
we're about as high as we could go.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things that the rating agencies would maybe do higher, but I don't think that Guilford would be able to do that.
To get to that level.
Correct.
Get
We're
to
just
that
not
level.
quite there.
Yeah, and they look at a variety of factors within the
Mhm.
community. It's financial management, your reserves, your
Economic
practice,
development.
economic development,
Mhm.
your practices, your financial practices, et cetera, and some long-term planning.
Correct,
Right.
long-term planning. And on top of that, how well we work with other departments, specifically the Board of Education, and that strong relationship helps us
Right.
for the rating agencies as
Right.
well.
Now, we went out for a couple of different types of bonds, and you want to talk a little bit about how much and what those projects are for and why we use each one of those types of funding vehicles?
Certainly. First, I'll start off by saying when we go out to bond and we borrow this money, we're typically borrowing the money for projects that we've already
Complete.
spent, either completed the projects or are significantly through them. So we use our reserves to pay the expenditures, and the bonds reimburse the town for that. So when we go to bond, the way we choose what we need is based on what we have already spent. So this year, we went out for $3.2 million of tax-exempt
Right.
bonds, and that was made up of about $400,000 for town projects,
Yep.
which were something for small, but the most of it was the school project, specifically some of the new work that's getting done on HVAC projects
projects.
over the summer. Yep.
Gotcha.
So that was our tax-free bonds, which we normally do on a year-to-year basis. We did very well with that.
The interest rate?
The interest rate was 2.2455, which was even lower
Low.
than we had anticipated that we got. So along with that, we did receive premium of about $150,000, and we have been using the premiums to help minimize the impact of the debt service payments on our budget.
Okay.
So we take those premiums, which is the amount that the bondholders pay over and above the amount of the bond, and we save that money, and we actually budget and use that in the next year to help bring the budget
That's
down
Good.
for debt.
Right.
So I mentioned tax-free bonds. This year, we did go out for taxable bonds. We had a number of projects that were very old, and the projects were done and completed. We just need to close them out, and in order to do that, we had to complete the bonding
Right.
and reimburse the town for expenses that we had already spent. Because of the age of the bonds, they became taxable, but our tax rate that we received was only 2.4644, slightly higher than our non-taxable bonds, which we were extremely pleased. And I'd just like to say, one might say, well, are we losing anything because we should have done those years before? And actually, we've saved money, because had we gone out and received this bonding at the time that the projects were done, it's when rates were really high. So should we have done them before? Probably. Did it hurt the town of Guilford? No, it actually helped us, because we're paying a lot lesser rates. So,
Good.
but they'll be done. We'll be getting them off of our books, and we hope to, on a regular basis, take those projects roll them off.
roll them
As
off,
much
that's
as
right.
we're rolling more on, we're
Right,
going to roll
roll
them
them
off,
off,
so
right.
we don't have that again.
Great.
The last piece of the puzzle
Yep.
were our bond anticipation notes, and those are 1-year short-term bonds that we use for specifically items that we're not sure if that money's going to need to be spent. this particular amount of $3.2 million is primarily the last payment, the last amount of expenditures for the Guilford High School, but it's the money that we anticipate receiving from the state as our final payment back to the town. So we don't want to bond that money yet because we're hopeful that we really don't have to pay that money. So by rolling them over 1 year at a time, the rating agencies know we're doing that specifically for that. Because once the state audits that project and gives us our final payment, then we'll know how much of that we really need to borrow.
Great.
And that rate was only 1.2934.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to change direction a little bit
Okay.
here. We're obviously into a new fiscal year, and I know the auditors are going to be coming in soon. We have some preliminary numbers in terms of anticipated surplus, and the number's big, nearly $1.8 million in terms of surplus. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, and you can validate whether all of my assumptions are correct, but there were a couple of reasons for that. The first of which is much higher than budgeted interest income on our deposits, our reserves. And that's largely because when we set that budget, it was in the spring of 2000, or the winter of 2017, right? So, you know, interest rates have come up, thankfully,
Yes.
for our personal positions, but the interest rates have come up over that time. There are a couple other components to why that's higher as well. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So interest rates does play a key
Huge
role
role,
in
right.
that number, but the main reason is because we have completed the high school.
Right.
So for the years that we were building the high school, that money, as I said, was going out from the town. And again, we would pay the bills
Right.
and then reimburse ourselves with bonding, with bonded funds. So during that time when we were actually paying those bills on a $96 million
Yep.
school, we didn't have that much money to invest
Right.
because we were using the money that we had in reserve, reimbursing us the following year, and immediately spending more
And
that
again.
following year. So now that the school is complete,
There's more to
all
earn
of those
on it,
reserves that
Are
we have
available.
are available
to earn on. Right.
exactly
Good.
to
Yep.
invest.
Right.
So we invest as much as we can.
Yeah.
We manage that
Right.
almost daily
Right.
to be sure that we're investing the maximum amount that we can, and that's why we're able to see such a large increase in the interest
That's right.
income.
That's
And I would anticipate that we would have about the same amount of money to invest next year, but we can't count on those high interest
right.
rates.
Well, the Fed just dropped the rate
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago.
Exactly.
And there's tremendous pressure from the man in the White House to have the Fed drop the rate even further,
Correct.
which could impact those
Right.
numbers.
So
Right.
the taxpayers need to know that we did increase significantly
Right.
the budget for this year in
Anticipation
anticipation.
of that. Right.
Not to the level of the amount we received this year, but almost
Almost
there.
Well, a couple of the other reasons that come to mind, we had adopted a very conservative position back in the late winter, early spring of 2017 related to state aid, because there were proposals were pretty draconian in terms of the cuts they were going to make, and we sort of took a middle of the road approach, not what they were calling for, but not what we had before. And then, lo and behold, we wound up with higher than anticipated state revenue. So that's another component of that surplus.
Correct.
Right, and then I think we also, the last one is we talk about tax collection rates were higher than anticipated because there were less adjustments based on appeals and so forth. So
Correct.
the good news is the money is there, and we are going to identify and work with the Board of Finance to identify places where we can utilize those funds to offset future tax implications.
Absolutely.
We prefer not to use it for operating, but for capital expenditures, I think one of the things we look at is taking $300,000 to $400,000 and put it aside for the next revaluation, which is coming down the pike in 3 years.
Correct.
Right?
That's going to be quite costly.
Costly.
Could be over
$400,000,
$400,000
right.
for that. So it's a perfect use
Yes, right.
of the surplus. We won't have to tax people for that. We
Right.
can just use the surplus.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Mary Jane, thank you very much for all the work you do and the great
Thank
work
you.
you do. And I'm going to take a cheap plug. I'm not sure how many years it is, but the financial body, the professional association, government finance officers association, has awarded the Guilford Finance Department an award of excellence for
their CAFR?
the CAFR for the financial reporting for how many years in a row? It's like 15
Oh,
or
at least.
At least,
Yes.
so.
We have a wall of fame outside
Yes,
our
we
our
do.
door.
So thank you for all the work that you and your department do.
Thank you.
Welcome back. And for this segment, I'm joined by Debbie Milano, our tax collector.
Hello.
Hello, Deb. Deb doesn't always find herself as the most popular person in town
No,
because
not at
most folks don't necessarily enjoy it, but it's obviously a critical function to ensure that the government is funded. And she works. She and her staff work well with the community.
They do.
And it's a trying time for some folks, and there are some challenges, but you guys do a great job down
Thank
there.
you.
I just want to talk a little bit. You've just come through your busy season. There are really two busy times of the year for you, and that would be the tax collection due times. You want to
Yes.
talk just a little bit about those two windows
Sure.
and how it works?
So this year was a little bit challenging
Right.
for us. We did not have any advance tax collection. Our bills went out late this year.
Sure, right.
So last in 2016, June for the 2016 grand list,
Right.
we took over $8 million.
Okay.
And so this year we did not collect that. So everything was on us in the month of July.
That's a lot of payments to process,
Yes,
right?
yeah. We have 33,180 accounts.
33,000
Yep,
again.
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of accounts.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think what happens is most folks don't rush to pay their taxes because I think the way it works is the tax bills are stated as due by
July,
July.
July 1,
Right.
and then August 1st was the last day to
is
pay.
the last payday
Right.
day. So
If they got it in the mail and it was U.S. postmarked by August 1st,
Right.
then it was considered an on-time payment.
that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to talk about, because I know there was some concern among some folks, and I actually got a couple of calls from folks who were concerned that when their checks did not clear
Right.
prior to August 1st. You want to talk a little bit about
Mm-hmm. Sure.
how we make sure that those payments are in fact credited to
Right,
their account?
that's correct. So we get mail every day,
Yep.
and unfortunately, we process the people who come to the window
Right.
first. They get first preference.
Right.
And then, as we can get to it, we do the mail. We keep them in the order that they came,
Right.
and we're going by postmark.
Right.
So anything that was postmarked by August 1st
Right.
was considered on time, even though we posted it the second and the third week of August. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of those, even though they're posted by in a timely fashion, they don't even arrive here till 3 or 4 days later because.
Correct.
Or
We're
2
going
days
by
later,
the, yeah,
going
we're
by the
postmark.
post office.
Right.
That's right. So I do know there were some folks, we received some calls from some concerned citizens
Yes.
who closely monitor their checking balances, and
They did.
it had not occurred.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that once if they don't pay them on time, there are penalties, right?
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about that and what kind of those are state statutes that govern that, and you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
our whole office is run by state statute. If they come to the window or we receive an envelope that is postmarked August 2nd, and again, it has to be U.S., not Pitney Bowes,
That's right.
3% interest goes
Okay.
on. It is 1.5% per month, but in that first collection month, it reverts back to the original due date of
Okay.
July 1, so
1.
they get 3% interest.
Just okay,
Mm-hmm.
compounded.
Yep.
Yeah. I know it's unfortunate. Some folks there are circumstances
Yes.
that are trying, and I know we get a lot of folks who appeal to us about can we waive the interest. You want to talk a little bit about how the state statutes deal with that?
Yeah, we cannot. We do, it falls under a state statute,
Right.
so we treat everybody the same, everybody fairly.
Right,
If it is in our error,
right.
then,
Then we can waive the
Correct.
interest. If there's an
Right.
error on the part of the town
Right.
relative to the amount or not sending them, well, no, actually.
correct. Well, if it's, let's say we mistook the date
Right.
on the envelope. We keep all the envelopes that
Right.
come in
Yep.
if they're late postmark. And
Gotcha.
we automatically send them out a delinquent notice
Okay,
saying that it was a late postmark.
Mark.
But if we find that maybe it wasn't that clear and we read the wrong date,
Date.
then we would take away
Good.
the interest. Yeah.
okay. I know there's, a lot of uncertainty out there about how that process works and whether or not you or I have the opportunity to waive some of those late fees. And, as hard as it is with some of the appeals that come to us, our hands are tied
They are.
by state statutes.
They are.
And I think the reason for those state statutes is so that political actors or municipal employees can't pick winners and losers,
Correct.
right? So they have to treat everybody fairly
Yep.
and everybody evenly. So you can't give to one and not to others.
Right. I feel that's the
That's a generous.
yeah, it's not the nice part of it, but that you do get to stand behind that statute. But
Right.
unfortunately, there are circumstances where you can't change it, and
Right.
it does tug at
It
your
hurts.
heart.
Absolutely.
But there's nothing we can do
And do
about
about
it. Yeah.
Good. Well, Deb, thanks for taking the
Oh,
time
you're welcome.
to talk to us. And you guys do great work down
Oh,
there.
thank you.
And
We enjoy the taxpayers.
Good. Good. Thank you
But
very
yeah,
much,
okay.
Deb.
Thank you. Thanks.
We're back, and I was glad to have the opportunity to talk to Deb and clear up some misconceptions about the flexibility around tax payments and waivers. For those of you who are suffering from insomnia, the show is about to be over, or relatively soon, but I wanted to close with a couple other points. I want to give you an update on the water main project. This is the project the town approved a couple of years ago now, a referendum to deliver water down to the Mulberry Point, Long Cove, and Tuttle's Point area. That project finally kicked off in June. True Blue, our contractor, started cutting in from Sachem's Head Road across the Fisher property, from whom we were granted an easement to connect through to down to Lower Road. So that work has started and is going along smoothly. And preliminary indications are they may well be ahead of schedule, but we don't want to hold to that. They have a 18 to 2-year window on that project. One of the things that has come to light as they go by various houses, they are going to allow those houses to connect, because as they build the segments out, they flush the system and they can tap into the system as they go. So that's good news for those residents. We continue to work towards identifying additional funding sources to diminish the impact of the assessment on those homeowners. As you may know, those homeowners in that area are the only ones footing the costs for this project. We have a variety of funding for that, funding sources, alternate funding sources, including $1.5 million from the Connecticut Water Company. We have a $450,000 grant from the state of Connecticut Department of Health for water, Clean Water Fund. We also have a revolving revolving loan fund for drinking water, which will allow us to borrow at a 2% interest rate over the course of this project, and that would be passed along, obviously, to those residents. So, good news is project's well underway, and we're looking to identify additional sources, because this project came in at over double the costs that were originally projected when it was approved at referendum. I have worked closely with our state representative Sean Scanlon, state senator Christine Cohen, and special advisor Jonathan Harris, special advisor to the governor Jonathan Harris, and the team up at OPM at the state to try to secure additional bond funds. Because at the end of the Malloy administration, we received $450,000 as a placeholder because we had yet to go to contract on the project. That $450,000 was in state bond money. We had originally been slated to receive 1.2 or 1.3 million dollars, but because we didn't have the contract in place, they backed it down, but left a placeholder in there. So we've asked for a significant amount of bonding from OPM. Now, just recently, the governor announced that the August bond meeting was canceled. We don't know when they're going to schedule another one, but we're going to continue to advocate. Sean, Christine, myself are going to continue to advocate for additional state bond money for this project. Simply this is a public health issue. There are folks who don't have access to clean, potable water, and there are also issues around septic systems in that area contaminating the water supply. So we think that this is a very appropriate project for the state to fund with bond proceeds, as they've done these kinds of projects throughout the state. So more to follow on the water main. We'll keep you updated on that. One last item relative to town business. This is going to be a tough year in terms of negotiations. 5 of the 6 unions associated with town employees are up for renewal. That includes Guilford Employees Association, the Guilford Supervisors Association, Police, Fire, Public Works. The only union that isn't up is our dispatchers union. So our HR director is going to be busy with negotiations, as well as the representatives from the Board of Selectmen who will participate in those negotiations. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is I just want to thank the countless volunteers in this community. We saw Peter Hawes here earlier today. He and his team of 75 people, I think he said, on that Performing Arts Festival. That's the tip of the iceberg. We have 43 different boards, commissions, or task force in this town, only 5 of which are elected by the public. The rest are all self-nominated volunteers. And this community runs on volunteers, and we couldn't do it without them. So I just want to extend a thanks once again to all those volunteers who participate. And if you have an idea that you might want to get involved, we'd welcome your time and your talents. And please reach out to the Selectman's office to find out what might be available for you to help serve your community. Thank you very much, and until next time, have a great day.